this expectation that voters in the states their electors will vote in accordance to the partisan choice of the state, I think sits at cross purposes with this idea that the Electoral College is meant to enhance the representation of political minorities in the country, right? That if you live in a state where 50.1% of the voters supported one candidate and 49.9% of the voters supported the other candidate, and under the rules as they exist, that 49.9%, near effectively half, is politically disenfranchised. And I would ask listeners, watchers, to consider the extent to which, if you don't agree with getting rid of the Electoral College, that the winner-take-all rules that we've adopted, that we've grafted onto this institution, the extent to which they serve to rob millions of people of meaningful political representation in every state of the union.
Can I come in here and respond? I want to ask a question of Jamelle. So do you think that in 1976, voters in the country were disenfranchised when Jimmy Carter was elected with 50.1% of the vote?
I think that Jimmy Carter's election in 1976, I think the extent to which Carter was a down-the-line partisan Democrat represents a kind of disenfranchisement in that regards, right? Because it's clear from the election results that the public wanted some sort of was divided on the kind of government they wanted, but they didn't want. I think you'd fairly say did not want a highly partisan form of government. And Carter wasn't particularly highly partisan, but you see the point I'm trying to make, that narrow decisions like that, I think, do represent, in some regards, some Americans not getting the kind of political representation they wanted. But I also think that this example doesn't quite fit, right? Because what we're talking about is the political representation of individual voters and whether or not their choice matters for the outcome. And if you were in this minority in Virginia, your choice simply doesn't matter for the outcome.
Yeah, but that's just not true.
Counts.
That's just not true. Of course, it matters for the outcome. Eventually, because any one voter is unlikely to switch the election, right? There's 200 million voters. Any one voter in that sense doesn't change the election, so you can say no voter matters. Voters matter eventually in the aggregate, and you can't go around in any election that's going to be won. There's going to be a losing candidate, and you can't use terms as you used like disenfranchised to say you lost. I'm sorry that you lost, but you were not disenfranchised, and let's not confuse those two things. I think that's a very important distinction to make.
No, I think you can use the disenfranchisement level. If you live in a state where voting is highly racially polarized, such that your particular political group will never be able to form a meaningful majority to win that state's electoral votes. And this isn't a hypothetical. This is Mississippi. This is Louisiana. This is Alabama, right? States where large percentages of the voters, 35-40%, are African American, but because of the high level of racial polarization, those voters will never, barring some real, let me finish, will never be able to form a coalition with enough white voters to win. Those voters are effectively disenfranchised under winner-take-all.
So voters who, for example, want to abolish the income tax in a state, and they may represent 20% of the vote, they can never get a majority. Are they disenfranchised?
I think precisely because...
No, they're not. Your answer is no, Jamelle. You know your answer is no. They're just outvoted, and that's a different thing.
My answer is no, because it's an example that has no relevance in the actual way our politics plays out. In the real world of American politics in 2020, polarization along lines of identity is the relevant form of polarization. And when we are as polarized as we are along lines of identity and geography, these two things are connected, then winner take all in states where people who represent a minority identity are unable to build large enough coalitions amounts to a kind of disenfranchisement. No one's polarized on income taxes.